Welcome to On the Issues. I'm Councilman Jim Waring, and joining me on today's show is Arizona Secretary of State, Michele Reagan. Secretary Reagan, welcome.
Thank
we really
you.
appreciate you coming back. You've been on the show before.
Back.
I thought
it's been a year and it went by like that.
It's been a year and it has gone by like that. And you know, we've had a big election since the last time you were on, several big ones. But there's been a lot of discussion, more than I ever remember, about sort of the procedures of elections, questions about how do you count provisional ballots? Does my mail-in ballot count after the election, if it gets there, you know, later than expected and so forth. So I was just hoping maybe if you could sort of talk to our viewers about, yes, Elections 101. That's an excellent way to put it. You put it so succinctly, because it's been in the news so much. It's been shocking
we were
this year
inundated.
how much been going.
As voters, all voters were inundated. It was elections all the time in 2016. So, and kudos to the voters for hanging in there, because I used to say it felt like we were having an election every 3 months. Oh, wait, we did have an election every 3 months. But then, of course, we ended with the big election, a presidential election. I don't think it gets any more exciting than that. And then it wasn't a sleepy presidential election. It was one with a lot of energy.
People were energy. That's an excellent way to put it.
Yes.
Very diplomatic. No, it was people were fired up on both sides and very interested in this and the
we
process.
had the highest number of voters in Arizona history, which is very exciting. A lot of that was due to population growth.
I was just going to say it wasn't necessarily the highest percentage.
Wasn't the highest percentage. Percentage was kind of in the average. It was kind of but most people ever voting. So that was, that was exciting for a lot of people, a lot of first-time voters. That was thrilling because, people want to sometimes be for presidential elections. They register to vote for the first time. So it was just, it was a good experience for a lot of people all around, even if they didn't like the outcome. But yeah, a lot of questions about why isn't my ballot counting? Do my ballots count? And a lot of those things happen on the county level. A little hard for city voters sometimes to understand, because City of Phoenix runs all their own elections. So,
we partnered with the county this time because we had a special election.
Correct.
It might have been the first time it's happened, I don't know, but there was a special election in District 3, and now there will be a runoff in March, which the city will run on its own. But we partnered with the county in November because in the past, you've had to go to 2 different polling places, and that is just impossible to explain to voters and completely unnecessary. So you saw the city council person on the ballot with the president for the first time, at least in my memory. I don't know, it may have happened way back in the past.
Right, and that may happen in the future again, may not. I know because the City of Phoenix now goes back to spring elections instead of the fall elections. So the world of elections is always changing, and so it's our job as the Secretary of State's office to keep people informed on what's changing. And one of the things with provisional ballots, what is a provisional ballot? It's some people think it's like a second-class ballot. It's not. It's if you go to a polling place and they're not quite sure if you're at the right polling place or if they're giving you the right information, giving you the right ballot, if you've given them the right information, if there's ever a question on anything, rather than deny someone the right to vote, you're given a provisional ballot, meaning here you go, here's your ballot, and we will figure it out later. But that way, we make sure the person gets their ballot.
And that's for the person who walks up and says, may I please have a ballot?
Right.
And
the information doesn't match. And so, and the stats on that after the election was all over was roughly 70-some% of those ended up counting. So a large number of those provisionals end up counting. That's good news. The better news, and not to get too geeky on you, but the good news is that the number of provisionals, the percentage that count, keeps going up and up every year, every election. So that was good. We were very pleased to see the number that were accepted this go around.
Because nobody likes it if someone takes the time to go in and their ballot doesn't count.
Exactly.
But at the same time, if you've crossed a congressional boundary line or something, then you're not eligible to vote.
If
you're in the wrong place, that's not going to work.
If you live in Flagstaff and you're down in Tucson trying to vote, and
that doesn't happen.
They're just, it's just not going to work out for you. But there are some very legitimate issues, but they can get solved. Maybe they just can't get solved right that minute, but they can get solved after Election Day. So let's just make sure that people get a chance to exercise their right to vote. We'll figure it out later. And again, let me be careful when I say we. A lot of times that we is our hardworking counties and our county recorders. The Secretary of State's office handles more of the bigger things. So statewide ballot initiatives, campaign finance, lobbyists, things that are the propositions, All of those go through the Secretary of State's office. So, but when it comes to elections, kind of we're all in it, all in the boat together. So we certainly all deal with the same issues.
So let's talk a little bit about, so I have my early ballot and I decide to walk it into the polls. I've signed and everything. People always ask me, what happens to all those ballots?
Right.
I drop them off. I mean, do they count them right then? What
That's
happens?
such a great question. So they get counted, absolutely. They get counted last, pretty much, of all the ballots, which makes sense if you think that if you had mailed that ballot in, the county recorder would have a chance to check the signature, make sure, hey, that's really Jim Waring that signed the envelope.
And they really check the signatures.
They really check those,
I've
absolutely.
heard about Supreme Court justice, because your signature could change over time. My signature is
They'll
sort of
check
consistently
up to,
awful.
They'll check up to
but
5 different
they compare 'em,
signatures
yeah.
that they have on file for you, because we understand your signature changes over time. So they'll check multiple signatures. And you know why it asks for your phone number on the ballot envelope? The reason why they ask for that is because if your signature doesn't match, they'll call you.
They want to call. And they have called, like I said.
Yeah.
I've heard different stories from other elected officials
Yeah, that's not
and judges.
that's not an identity thing. Like they're trying to get more information on you. That's a benefit to you.
And I have heard complaints about that. I personally consider that a good thing for ballot security and so forth.
Absolutely.
But some people have said, well, they're calling me or it's still me. But they're trying to be as sure as possible. It basically is what you're saying, that it's
That's
you
your form
who's
of
voting.
identity. Because if you go into the polls and vote, you have to show ID. But if you mail in your ballot or you're dropping off your ballot at the polls, there's no way to show identification. So, and remember, state law says that you need to show ID when voting. So the identification is your signature. And so yes, they absolutely check. And if you had mailed that ballot in, people would get a chance, the recorders would get a chance to check those signatures, say, yes, that's Jim Waring, open up your ballot and process it before the election day so that number is, that total is ready to go on election day. However, if you drop that ballot off on the poll at the day of the polls, they still have to, polls close, everybody wants the results on election night. There's this big stack of ballots still waiting for signature verification. So they don't just start ripping them open and putting them through the machines. They have to make sure, was that really Jim Waring? And did Jim Waring vote twice? Did you also vote at the polls and then drop
So they're
one
matching
off?
up the list too.
Correct.
To make sure that nobody, and people have gotten caught doing that.
There have been people that have gotten caught. Now, there's not a lot
They're
of people.
enthusiastic voters, but that's a little too enthusiastic for our taste.
People always say, where's the proof in that? Show us the convictions. Well, we generally don't convict people for doing that. Their ballots, generally, the rule is it's...
I'm not saying it's common, but it has happened, including
sure, it
this
happens.
cycle. There were articles in the paper,
Absolutely.
not just here, but around
it
the
happens
state. Yeah.
almost every election. And sometimes it's just an error. Somebody doesn't know, or they think, well, I can't remember if I mailed it in, or I asked my husband to mail it in, maybe he didn't, or I'm not sure if it got there. I just really want to make sure. But there's just a rule. It's just first ballot in. It's the one that counts. So.
Well, a couple questions come to mind. First, so the percentage, this is a common question I get. What percentage of voters now vote by mail as opposed to going to the polls?
Changes every election, but it can go as high as 80% in some areas. So
I think the city, it's been 95 for some of our elections.
yeah, and some states now, not our state, but some states are completely all mail.
I think Oregon is one of those, right?
Washington.
I believe that's right, Washington.
So there's just, that's just what some states have chosen to do to save money on polling locations. Arizona isn't there yet, just because there's a lot of people who still love to have.
There are people who are uncomfortable with it. I meet those people who are like, nope, I like taking my kids in, or I don't trust it, or I want to make sure it gets there. But to
It's
that
something
point,
that the legislature will have to look at in the future, just because it does cost about $10 million for each statewide election. $10 million.
and as you said, we had
4.
4 this year, so those are expensive.
And you're not going to put a price on people's right to vote. So we certainly don't want to say that there's any cost that's too great.
High, sure.
However, the legislature, every time that they call for a special election, we always like to remind them, make sure you add $10 million to the budget for that. And they'll say, sometimes we'll add it next year. No. If you're going to call for the special election, you need to put it in right now, because those people that are running the elections, City of Phoenix, Maricopa County.
It's expensive also, and just you
Tucson.
have to buy stuff.
Yeah,
you have to buy
they
stuff
have
in
to put the
advance.
money
You have
out.
to print it together. We get those bills all
You
the
have
time.
to, the polling places, all that stuff. It takes thousands of people around the state to put on an election.
City of Phoenix, I think our number is about $1 million. I think we could save some money by partnering with the counties.
You actually do. You do a very, City of Phoenix does a very nice job in a couple of things with the early voting. Some of your early voting centers have some really nice hours. We ask the counties to copy.
You can go drop off your ballot well before the election.
Yeah,
if that's what you want
we
to do.
actually ask the counties to copy the City of Phoenix's, the way some of the cities do it. We ask them to copy that after one of the elections, just because we're like, hey, the way some of the cities do it is preferable, we believe. So.
Well, Chris Meyer, our city clerk, does an excellent job. We have had discussions at council meetings about the cost of our elections and the efficiency of doing it the way we do it and so forth. But that is certainly not a reflection on his office, and I'm really pleased to hear that you say that
he
you're
does a great
encouraging
job.
the counties to model us.
Yeah, we've in some instances, absolutely, and then in some instances we like to kind of joke that some of your elections are by invite only.
we have a little
They're
lower
at strange
turnout.
times, but where we don't know when the elections are. And
when you have a 35-year, $31 billion transportation plan, you're getting, I think, 22% turnout. That's not ideal either. So
no, but that's not your election guys' problem. That's the
politicians
council's
are deciding.
problem.
That is totally correct. And for the record, I'm the one who says, let's do it at times when people are actually used to voting. But that's perhaps a discussion for another day. But I did want to touch on something that came up earlier, because people do have some discomfort about whether my vote got there. So now you can go online,
yes,
correct?
We created a tool for them to be able to go online and check. They can go to, we unveiled a new website this year called Arizona.vote. It works for no matter what county you're in, what city you're in, doesn't matter, which is really nice. So statewide, go to Arizona.vote. You could enter.
Is Arizona spelled out?
It's spelled out.
Spelled out.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And put in your driver's license number or your voter ID number, and it will tell you whether your ballot has been received.
Does
by
it
the
show you
county.
for past elections too, or just the current election?
It's always, Arizona.vote is always set up for the most current election, so whatever is relevant at that time. But there is a way from each county to go and look for
your
all past
history, too.
elections. So it's a great tool just to kind of
Well, it
see.
might give some people comfort too, as you say, as more and more people are voting by mail.
Yeah, you could see if
You
your
know.
provisional counted too. If you were one of those people that had to drop, do a provisional, and you're kind of like, shucks. Well, if you want to know if it counted, I would check. I always check just because I'm kind of geeky that way. But absolutely. And so it's kind of a fun tool, and we found people loved it. In fact, Arizona.vote got. I got to look up the numbers again, but I want to say it was like 20,000 visits, just between this tiny little window between it was like right before the general election. We had a flood of people go to it, which was great because word was getting around if you wanted like the relevant,
We tried to tell a lot of people about it in my office.
up to date information to go to Arizona.vote, and so we were tracking the traffic we got, and we were blown away by how much traffic had just gotten this little tiny window right before the general.
Well, I've always been sympathetic because, like I said, some people are really leery of it, but then you can't necessarily always count on good health or your travel situation and so forth. So people sometimes have to vote that way. And this is an excellent tool to let them know and give them comfort. Hey, my ballot got there, or I have to go in and vote a provisional.
Yeah, or it didn't get
Yeah,
there,
it didn't
so
go
I gotta
there,
go.
exactly.
I
And
gotta go into the polls.
I got to go in, and that's something that I think might help people get more adjusted to this, because it's taken off since you and I were first running for office.
Oh,
when I think it was
golly.
about 50%.
Remember, we used to have to
you're
send out
talking 80%
cards to
now.
people.
Yes,
And then they'd
there
have
was
to
no
send them
permanent
back
list.
and
yeah.
say, do you want an early ballot? And then you'd have to send one back and say, yes, I do. And
Every time.
every single
single
time.
time, yeah.
And then there was even a time where when you were sending your ballots back, you had to put stamps on them. And a lot of other states, you have to put stamps on your ballots, sending them back. We are
We are right in not doing that.
Absolutely, we're right. And plus, you'd have to put multiple stamps on some of those ballots because
You
they're.
shouldn't have to pay to vote. That's.
But in some states, you do. By the way,
I
have
did
to
not
put,
know that. That's interesting.
Put stamps on return ballots. And our actual state, for as much as we all complain, things could be better. Absolutely, things could be better. We're always looking for feedback, how we can make it a better experience or make it more accessible. But as I go and meet with other Secretary of States, we're actually light years ahead of some other states in our ability to vote by mail, our ability to just automatically have those ballots sent to you with the permanent early voting list, with not having to pay for postage. all of these things that we've already conquered, gone through, and corrected, where some states are still dealing with that and haven't corrected them yet.
Well, just keeping on the early ballot, so people often ask this question. So on election night, obviously we're candidates, so we're sitting there, oh my gosh, what's going to happen when we're on the ballot? They release the results usually around 8 o'clock. It seems like you get some of the first returns. So what is encompassed in those first returns? What's been counted and then what hasn't? You already said the people dropping off the early ballot that's sealed at the polling place, they're the last ones counted. So we know it's not them. But can you talk a little bit about what that is when you first see those results? Because they change. My dad's like, how could it change that much? Well, different people voting different ways and so forth. We had an election, obviously, in Gilbert for Congress this year where it changed fairly dramatically and then wound up being a 27-vote issue.
That was crazy to watch, because I know that, someone was up and then all of a sudden was down. The first thing we count is the first batch that comes out is the the early ballots that were mailed in during the course of election month, is what I call it.
Because you've been getting ballots for weeks.
Correct.
The county recorder's been getting ballots for weeks by the time
and the county recorder checks those signatures, is processing those ballots.
And they start counting.
So they have those numbers and they're able to post those right away. When I say right away, it's 1 hour after the polls close. So is what the law says. And so right around 8:10 is generally that first batch of numbers. Those are the early ballots.
Which could be 60–70% of the total turnout, roughly, because it's not all the early ballots, but it's a good chunk of the early ballots. And then the election day vote.
And then election day votes are the second kind of wave of numbers that you see. Maybe they come in like maybe an hour later, half an hour later sometimes. Those are the ballots that actually went through the machines at the polling locations.
And so that could be 20–30% of the total vote.
It depends on what kind of election it was. So that's going to be in a smaller election, like a special election. It's going to be a lot smaller of a number than a big general presidential election where people are a lot more excited.
Where it's just a flood.
Right.
And people say, well, how come it takes so long? Or how come I have to stay up till midnight to find out, or what have you? But how many people voted in Arizona this year?
It was over 2.5 million.
That's a lot of counting to be done in a really small period of time.
Because we forget that, because I'm Scottsdale, you're Phoenix. I mean, we forget that not everybody lives in this area, obviously. This is the situation in let's say, Coconino County. Why does it take so long to post results? Well, here's Coconino County. They've got Indian tribes where there's voting going on. Some of the tribes, one of them's at the top of the Grand Canyon. One of the tribes is at the base of the Grand Canyon. And election day for them consists of flying a generator to the base of the Grand Canyon. It consists of mules taking the ballots down to the polling place, hiking the ballots back out.
I've hiked the Grand Canyon. That's not that easy.
Yeah, no, it's a pretty arduous task to get the polling information in and out of that polling location. And so, and after all that's said and done, then they've got to transmit some of the results through secure phone lines, of course, because nothing's hooked up we don't want it all hooked up to the internet. And so some of those things when we hear, well, what's taking so long? Why aren't the numbers just like that? Well, we're not all, in some of these rural areas, we're not all like Phoenix or Scottsdale or Mesa.
And we're a lot more just size-wise condensed, too. It's more people in a concentrated area.
And we have to remember those votes are just as important.
Well, as we've seen with elections, like you said, 27 votes in one election with thousands, tens of thousands of people voting. It makes a difference.
It's fascinating what happens in some of these areas to make sure that different populations can vote.
Well, and you look at a congressional district like CD1, which has had several contested elections in the last decade, that's so spread out. It's a huge area, much bigger than a lot of states.
That district's like a snake. It goes around the entire state.
Well, and it's a lot bigger than a lot of states, if not in terms of population, certainly in terms of size. And even for the legislatures that cover it, there's just tons of towns you have to get to, and to get all that tabulated and put out as quickly as they've done is really a monumental undertaking, as you suggest.
Yeah, we never, in that particular district, the numbers that we're watching from all the different counties, it's always interesting, because it can look like someone's winning, but you're like, oh no, that's...
Which has happened. There have been all but victory
speeches. That's Graham County, but wait until
changes.
Navajo comes in and Coconino comes in, and that's going to totally skew it, because they're totally different populations of voters. So it makes it fun. But, you know, again,
Not so much for the candidates, where it's a little probably more nerve-wracking.
election night is its own animal for so many of us.
So
But no elections this year, probably.
No.
And you're Phoenix.
Phoenix will have our elections, but that, as you said, the city will run its elections in March and August, and then if there needs to be runoffs, then November, because there's no mayoral race. So we'll see how all that goes. But you know, we'll see turnout probably go back down from where it was. Obviously, lots more people voted in
it's such an
Council
important
District 3 this
election.
time because it was a presidential election. Then normally maybe it wouldn't have turned out for a city election.
Right, and we'd definitely be watching those numbers because it's sad because they're such important elections. And one of the things, especially about your council races, the things that really affect people's lives in Phoenix, as you know more than anybody, it's generally not the president that's coming and affecting your life. It's your councilman. Those decisions that you make are touching people's businesses and homes so much quicker than presidential
Well, it's
decisions.
police, fire, parks,
Right.
garbage, airport water. I mean, it's definitely
roads.
things that people would miss if they were gone. So.
But you know, but everyone will come out and vote for president, which we certainly love. But then some of these local races, they stay home or they don't even
Well, you raise
know
an
about
excellent
them.
point because the undervote, which is, I guess, loosely translated when people vote for some races but don't vote for others.
Right,
Is that,
vote for the top, and then when they get to the bottom of the ballot, like, who cares about those
the
races?
undervote was kind of staggering in the city council race. You still had way more people voting than you normally have in a city council race, but you also had way fewer people who actually sent in a ballot, voted for president, U.S. senator, Congress, but as they work their way down, there is a drop-off to the point where people don't make it to the end of their ballot.
Right.
And that was, I forget how many thousands of votes it was.
Do you know how many calls we got this time of people saying, I can't find the propositions. How come the propositions aren't? And we're like, you need to turn the ballot over. And they go, oh,
Yeah, there
click.
it is. There it is. Yeah, I was gonna say, you're not finding them. They're long. They're there. But it was a long ballot this time, but
It
not
was.
the longest that I remember.
No, there's only 2 ballot questions. I mean, I've
There have
had
been
some
times where it's
ballots
been,
of
I
like
think,
8 or 9.
Yeah, I think even was it 13 one time. It was just
Yeah, those
our
are-
founding fathers made it a lot easier
don't
than
wanna
other
be
places
California.
to put stuff on the ballot. And
But we don't want to. I mean, I prefer that. I would still prefer that we have the ability to, if there's a mistake in something, wording or whatever, that things can be changed. And once it gets on there, that's it.
that's it. That's
But-
it. It's done. Yeah, I mean, there was actually I forget how many years ago it was now, but there was actually a proposition to say you can't really change a proposition once it passes. So,
Right.
you know, once that happens, for good or bad, you know, we
That's it.
all own that decision. So
lock
tread
hands 'cause it's
cautiously.
done.
But you know, and some of that stuff is really controversial. There was a proposition, 2 propositions on the ballot in May, and turnout for that was less than normal. You know, obviously that affected the city of Phoenix, the pension issue certainly. But people don't seem to get as focused on that as they do on candidate races for whatever reason. So
Well,
turnout
the
just isn't
pension
quite
issue
the
is
same.
going to cost them more than
It's
so
interesting,
many
though. You're
other
right.
things.
Some of those
It's
things are
like,
so much more important
that's
to
going
your
to hit your
actual daily
pocketbook
life.
so much more than probably something that you could do. Not that you're not important,
No,
because I know
but I
you
understand
are.
what you're saying. Yes.
But you know, you have to go get other people to vote along with you if you want to affect what those pension issues are getting frightening. I know they certainly are on the state level as well.
Yeah, no, it's something that you know, is good editorializing here. We were happy that that passed.
Yes,
but again, the turnout was, and I forget what was turnout in that election. It wasn't particularly high, as I remember.
Some of the city elections, and it's this way. I know it was this way in Scottsdale too before they switched to August and November. They were like, could be under 20%.
Well, I know it was one of my bills in the legislature that switched their elections and some others back in the early 2000s. And I think in 2004, for their mayoral race, which I believe were held in March and May, if I'm not mistaken, they had 30.5% turnout. When they switched to August and November, it was 85.5%, according to the City of Scottsdale website. So the timing of this matters greatly.
Oh,
to voters.
of that there is no doubt.
Yeah.
And that's why we always like to, some of us in the election community like to joke that some of the city elections are by invite only. It's like, do you really want your turnout
I think
to go up
we've
or
had
not?
as low as, I think, 15%, which
So-
is staggeringly low.
Because then that is just proven, that's just a fact, that when you go to the elections with other, things on the ballot, you're going to get a higher turnout. So the question is, do you want that or not? But some people don't.
Do you see, so people have talked about, switching gears for a second, about voting online. There was a lot of talk about that a few years ago. I think maybe there have been some trial studies about how that would work. Now, of course, there has been a lot of swirl around this election, so I'm not sure. I haven't heard as much about when are we going to start voting online.
dead for a while.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'll be hearing as much about that. But for a while, I was hearing about it. Just in my job, you're actually actively involved in running the elections. Do you see any changes on the horizon in how we vote? I know we've had hanging chads in 2000, different ways that people at the form of the ballot.
Absolutely, changes on how we are voting are coming. Probably not monumental. I think balloting will always largely have a paper component to it, just because, especially after this last year when we had entities coming in and trying to hack our databases, which no matter what anybody says, we did have, because that did happen, obviously, in our state. Fortunately, knock on wood, I don't think they got anything. But yes, you're going to have, changes. And the interesting thing to watch is that elections generally follow banking law or banking practices. So banking used to be all on paper. Banking then switched to punch cards, and then election kind of followed that. Then banking switched to like ATM type style thing, and then you kind of saw elections kind of shift to that a little bit.
I remember the punch card growing up in Illinois.
Yeah.
When I was first voting, I know you're from Illinois too, so you probably had the same experience.
And then banking went to a lot of on mail, and that's where, and now where is banking? Banking is electronic. So the notion that elections aren't going to ever have an electronic component to it is, we know that that's coming. When? I have no idea. Certainly not for a while, because it hasn't been proven safe. And so, but the military does some form of electronic voting. For overseas military, they're allowed to do that. So we test it with them, and it's great. They're able to vote any way they can get their ballots back to us.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on. Amazingly, that was our half hour, but it seemed like it flew by. For me, I had a nefarious motive. People ask me, these kind of questions, and I'm just going to say, could you go to my website or Facebook or whatever and watch the show, and then we'll come back and talk about it afterwards. So I appreciate you filling us in. I think this was really probably helpful for our viewers. It was certainly helpful for me.
Well, I think it'll be helpful with your election coming up in March.
Yep.
So
people understand
and anyone
kind of how
who's
this
watching,
works.
please go vote. Doesn't matter who you vote for, just vote.
Thank you, Michele. We really appreciate you being here, and we'll see you next time. And if you have any questions or comments, please call my office at 602-262-7445 or visit my website at phoenix.gov/district2. And we look forward to seeing you next time on The Issues.